I think one thing that everyone in the UK is sick of currently is the fact that our energy system is stupid. Our energy system is really stupid. It's really expensive. It's some of the most expensive energy in Europe. We've had to deal with years and years now, ever since 2022, of high energy prices being debilitating in terms of both personal and business finances in this country. And this clip sent me absolutely south. I cannot believe this stuff. I mean, it all made sense once you'd heard it in context. It all made sense when you realised the material forces at play. But actually hearing what's happening here, just honestly, some insane shit. Have a listen to this.
So far this year alone, we've paid £250 million just this year so far, turn off wind farms on windy days and compensate them for being turned off. Because instead of selling the electricity cheaply, they're all trying to sell it at that national price. And there's not as much demand. But in the system I've just described, locational pricing, so prices will fall everywhere, but they particularly fall in areas that have got a lot of generation, obviously especially renewables. But it would also mean that, when we're building new generation, we'd be building it close to where it's needed, and we'd need up to 1/3 less new grid, 1/3 fewer pylons, cutting the costs and reducing the number of communities impacted by
Just
that.
on that 250 million quid, last year it was £1 billion that was spent to temporarily shut down wind farms when the wind was blowing because there was too much generation of electricity, not enough places for it to go. So are you saying actually the demand for that electricity exists? It's just the way in which the pricing is structured means no one wants to sell it cheaply, they can sell it for more, or they get paid to shut the wind farm down. So it's win-win.
Well, it would definitely be better. I mean, literally, at least let the turbines turn and let people use that electricity cheaply. They can do
But that's
the
a
washing, they
farce,
can
isn't it? I
charge
mean, that
cars.
is an absolute farce that we're paying to shut these things down.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, and that's why we're campaigning so hard on this. Because, look, at the end of the day, as a nation, we have built a lot of wind farms and solar farms, but we're not getting the benefit of that.
So this is quite frankly, absolutely 100% unmitigated insanity. So what this is a function of marginal cost pricing, which is the current pricing mechanism that we have in the United Kingdom, where we pay for our electricity at unit prices of the most expensive kind of electricity that gets produced, okay? So, the most expensive electricity that gets produced in this country comes from gas. We try not to use gas, we try to use all the cheaper renewables up until the point where demand hits the position where we have to start turning on gas-fired power stations. And once you hit that point, the marginal price increases because the most expensive form of generation is gas power. And we've turned it on, we've started using it, therefore prices go up across the board. And this is really, really profitable, up to a point for the renewable energy network. There is a cap on the profits that can be made on this electricity, so they can only make a certain amount through this system. But at the very least, there is not a market rate that's being set at the start. It is being done via the marginal cost of the highest producer. And so if we don't start turning on gas power, the renewable sector makes less money. Okay? So what they want to do is sell their electricity at the peak times when the unit price is higher, because they're essentially doing the same thing rather than selling it cheaply when the demand is lower. And because they are having to turn these things off, the government is compensating for them. This is an entirely broken system. It's an entirely broken system. And the thing that's broken here is the fact that we privatized our energy network. I have seen some really dumb takes on this particular clip that's been going viral on Twitter from people saying somehow net zero to blame here. Like, well, if we just paid all of the expensive prices all the time for the gas-fired power when we're making electricity, right? If we just had the marginal cost be the price forever and we just use the more expensive energy forever, that would somehow be better than having it cheaper sometimes, more expensive sometimes, but not as cheap as it could be if we were forcing these private companies to sell at the cheaper prices rather than waiting for the most profitable way to do it. Because this is what it's about. It's about maintaining profit. The profit margin is what's being maintained here, rather than it being a fault of privatization. Like, if you think this is somehow a net zero problem, you're living in fantasy land when it's cheaper to produce. Like, the whole reason we're in this position is because the cheaper to produce kinds of energy want to sell when the prices are higher when we're using gas power. What this is a function of marginal cost pricing, a silly pricing system, and on top of that, it's a function of privatization. It is putting these energy projects in the hands of private capital who do not care about social utility, who don't care about what happens to the people of this country. They don't care about people who can't afford to put the heating on. They care about how much money they make. Whereas if it was publicly owned, they would keep them on all the time. If it was publicly owned, we would use the energy abundance that we've spent money creating, right? We have spent money to create energy abundance that we need to maintain high levels of power. We could be having more storage as well, to have them on all the time, so we could store power, and so we didn't have these down periods, and we always had access to cheap, clean, renewable power at the low prices that we could do when demand is lower. We could have all of this if we had more storage and more supply, and we've taken this energy abundance that we've paid for, that we've created, that was sold off into private hands in the fucking 1980s by Thatcher, and they are trying to sell it back to us, and won't sell it to us when it's too cheap because they want to make more profit. We could have, if this was all in public hands, we'd just be able to have all of the energy being sold back to consumers at cost, and yet now we have the national grid making money off the top because that's privatised. We have the producers making money off the top because that's privatised. We have the energy supply companies palming money off the top because that's all privatised. Who does this serve? Who does this serve? This serves nobody other than the energy companies themselves, but the oligarchs who control them. The oligarchs in control of the energy companies are the ones who benefit. Because, look, even if you're a capitalist, like even if you are a liberal capitalist, you're somebody who values private businesses and enterprise and all this kind of stuff, right? You value the contributions of small businesses in this country. In what world do you think that a small business can survive in this country when commercial energy prices are more than double they are in Finland? Okay? Like, how do you think this economy can survive if people can't put the factories on because the electricity is too expensive, because some profiteer when some private equity company who has a large share in an energy generation company won't turn on the wind farm because they wouldn't be able to sell the electricity at expensive enough price because demand isn't high enough? How can a small business survive? Spoiler alert, they can't survive. Spoiler alert is these businesses will not be able to survive if energy prices stay this high. And people won't attract more investment capital to the UK either because of our dumb privatised system. It's so monumentally stupid, which is why it's even more stupid that Rachel Reeves wants to get private equity and private capital, green finance, into these new energy projects that are being promised by their supposed green prosperity plan, where it's a quarter of public investment and 3/4 of private investment, because then you're still maintaining the profit motive for shareholders, and they have monopoly power because they're the majority shareholders and the government is a minority shareholder with very little actual voting power in terms of how these companies will operate. This was going to be their plan, was going to be publicly owned, and then some green financier at the World Economic Forum, Davos, was like, no, not publicly funded. No, don't do that, Rachel. You shouldn't be spending public money. Let the private sector get their little teeth in. Let them have their pound of flesh out of our electricity generation for the people of this country. And all it's going to lead to is more of these problems. And the government and the regulator is helping pay these people to keep the fucking lights off. We need to have a proper government that socialises these things in the interest of the people who use them, in the interest of the working classes, in the interest of people who are being made destitute by sky-high energy bills, and even the small businesses, right? I know this should be like a murder I'm breaking here on leftist media by saying that maybe small businesses shouldn't have high energy bills either. No one should have high energy bills. And the only reason why this is being bad for both businesses and consumers and residential occupants is because people out there are putting profit above people. And at the end of the day, that's the problem with capitalism. It's the base problem with capitalism is that it puts profit above people, it puts profit above social utility, it puts profit above the environment. I know it's probably me being wrong, but I like to have more faith in Ed Miliband. I think a non-Starmer government would be much better with the brief. I agree. I think if Ed Miliband was left to his own devices, he'd be doing fine. I think if Ed Miliband was being left to his own devices on this and wasn't being controlled by the Politburo, he'd have much better policy. But unfortunately, he has entirely got his political position being curtailed by Morgan McSweeney and his fiscal position being curtailed by Rachel Reeves and the Treasury. He can't do anything. His hands are tied. Why is this not publicly owned? Just make it publicly owned. Just take the shit off the profiteers who don't need it. Green money up the wall on carbon capture and storage. Yep, just to make the fossil fuel companies happy. I'm at my wit's end. I really am at my wit's end. Because they could end marginal cost pricing overnight if they wanted to. They could nationalise the grid overnight if they wanted to. It's insane the grid's in private hands because it's a fixed monopoly. Alicia Kearns on Question Time last week saying, oh, well, the grid connection time is really long and we can't get these energy projects started up quickly enough. I'm like, it's because you privatise the grid. And nationalising the grid isn't like far left, crank Trotskyist, anti-Semite politics from the jumbly crumbly concrete man, like a bunch of liberals would tell you it was. nationalising the grid was in Neil Kinnock's 92 manifesto. Like, if it's good enough for Kinnock, surely it's good for all the liberals, right? Ed Miliband was unaware about marginal cost pricing and got brought up to him by Climate Adam. Incredible, incredible. This is like Donald Trump not knowing what AUKUS is. And if you disagree, just get kicked out like Louise Haig. They would probably just mandate he eats bacon sandwiches for lunch. Oh dear. Oh well. Anyway, I guess this is just yet another privatization success story to add to the ever-increasing pile of them. Brilliant. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.